Have you ever wandered through an ancient city and felt like the streets themselves were whispering secrets from another time? Picture yourself stepping onto the cobblestones of a narrow, winding medieval lane, the kind that twists and turns so unpredictably you can't see what lies beyond the next bend. It's easy to assume these charming, crooked pathways grew by accident over centuries, shaped by the whims of local builders or the limitations of the landscape. But what if I told you that every curve, every angle, every deliberate narrowing or widening was part of a grand design, a hidden language written in stone and earth? These streets weren't just built for getting from place to place. They were engineered for survival, charged with meaning, and layered with symbolism that connected the earthly to the divine. We begin with the words of urban historian Lewis Mumford, who reminds us that the city is a fact in nature, like a cave, a run of mackerel, or an ant heap. But it is also a conscious work of art. In the Middle Ages, this artistry took a remarkably intentional form. The geometry of medieval streets served as both military strategy and spiritual expression, influencing everything from how a town defended itself against invaders to how its people experienced faith, power, and community. These designs were far more than functional. They were philosophical statements carved into the very ground beneath people's feet. From the defensive curves that baffled enemy soldiers to the sacred alignments that mirrored the heavens above, these patterns tell a story of human ingenuity and profound belief. In this video, we're going to unravel that story together. We'll explore how these hidden geometries shaped daily life, decode the meanings behind their forms, and reveal why these ancient designs still resonate in our modern world. You'll come away with a new lens through which to see not only medieval towns but the very idea of urban space itself. This is a journey into the heart of what makes a city more than just a collection of buildings. It's about how shape became strategy, how stone became symbol, and how the past continues to speak to us if we're willing to listen. So let's step into those shadowy, intriguing lanes and discover the genius etched into their curves. To truly grasp the genius of medieval street geometry, we need to journey back to its roots. Picture the heart of a bustling Roman town where two grand, straight avenues slice through the urban fabric. The Cardo runs north to south, the Decumanus east to west, intersecting at a perfect right angle to form a central forum. This was the ultimate expression of order, control, and imperial power, a gridiron plan imposed upon the landscape to facilitate military movement, trade, and administration. When the Roman Empire receded, it didn't simply vanish. Its physical skeleton remained, and medieval communities moved into these ancient shells, inheriting a framework of stone and order. But the world had changed. The centralized power that built those rigid grids was gone, replaced by local lords, constant threats, and a new dominant force, the church. The straight, predictable Roman roads, so ideal for legionnaires on the march, were now vulnerabilities in an age of raids and sieges. So medieval planners did something fascinating. They didn't erase the old Roman lines, they adapted them. That straight Cardo might become the main market street, but it would be pinched narrower, with new alleys branching off it like tendrils, creating choke points and dead ends unknown to Roman engineers. The open forum might be dominated by a massive cathedral, its shadow falling across the old civic space, repurposing imperial grandeur for spiritual glory. Historian John Templer captures this evolution perfectly, noting that medieval planners adapted classical ideas to fit hilly terrains and defensive needs, creating a unique blend of order and chaos. This adaptation wasn't just about defense, it was a conversation with the land itself. In places like the hill towns of Italy, the strict Roman grid was simply impossible to impose. Towns like Siena or San Gimignano grew on steep ridges, and their streets had to flow with the natural contours of the earth. This resulted in a more organic, almost fluid street pattern that still felt intentional. The main street would follow the spine of the hill, while smaller lanes cascaded down the slopes connected by steep staircases. This was planning in harmony with geography, not in defiance of it. Furthermore, other influences began to weave into this urban tapestry. In Northern Europe, the layout of Germanic tribal settlements, often circular or clustered around a central green for communal gatherings, blended with the surviving Roman patterns. And overarching everything was the ecclesiastical influence. The siting of a monastery or a cathedral could become the new nucleus of a town, with streets radiating outward or leading processional paths toward its doors. This created a new kind of sacred geometry, where the most important sightline wasn't from a city gate to a forum, but from a pilgrim's approach to the rose window of a cathedral. We can see this layered history in a city like Cologne, Germany, where the faint outline of the Roman grid is still detectable beneath the medieval market squares and the overwhelming presence of the Gothic cathedral. This foundation of adaptation and synthesis, taking the old order and making it fit a new, more complex world, set the stage for everything that followed. It transformed street design from a simple exercise in surveying into a profound act of strategy and symbol, a lived experience that shaped every aspect of daily medieval life. Now, let's step into the mind of a medieval defender. If those inherited Roman grids were like an open book to an invading force, the new street geometries of the Middle Ages were a labyrinthine puzzle designed to be unsolvable under pressure. This was urban design as active fortification, where every architectural decision was a calculated move in a deadly game of chess. Envision yourself not as a tourist, but as a confused and terrified soldier funneled into one of those narrow, serpentine lanes in Carcassonne. The high stone walls on either side seem to lean in, cutting off the sky. You round a sharp, unexpected bend, and your view extends only a few feet ahead. You're disoriented, your sense of direction is shattered, and your unit's formation is broken. This was precisely the point. Military historian Kelly de Vries put it starkly: every bend was a trap, every alley a potential ambush point. The psychology at play here was sophisticated. A straight, wide street offers a clear objective and a clear line of sight. It allows for organized advances and effective use of ranged weapons. But a winding, irregular path breeds confusion and fear. It disrupts the momentum of a cavalry charge, rendering horses nearly useless in the tight confines. It breaks up large formations into vulnerable, isolated groups that can be picked off one by one. From above, defenders perched on rooftops or behind battlements on connecting walls had a field day. They could rain down rocks, boiling oil, or arrows on invaders who were effectively trapped in these stone corridors, with nowhere to run and no way to effectively return fire. This wasn't just about building walls around a town. It was about turning the entire interior into a multi-layered defensive system. This strategy manifested in several clever architectural tricks. Planners intentionally created chicanes, sharp, artificial bends often built into an otherwise straight passageway to force anyone moving through to slow down and expose their unshielded side. They designed dead-end streets that would lure invaders in, only to trap them in a courtyard where they could be attacked from all sides, a tactic known as a killing sack. The integration with the main fortifications was seamless. Major streets would often lead directly to a fortified gate or a citadel, but the path there was never direct. It was a gauntlet. We can see this brilliantly preserved in places like the Shambles in York, England. While famously charming today with its overhanging timber-framed buildings, its narrowness and subtle curves were originally meant to constrain and control movement. Similarly, the rival districts or contrada of Siena were not just social clubs. Their boundaries were often formed by these defensive street patterns, creating a series of defensible neighborhoods within the greater whole. This makes you wonder, in our modern world of wide boulevards built for cars and efficient traffic flow, what have we lost in terms of passive security and human scale? These medieval designs created natural traffic calming, discouraged large-scale violent incursions, and fostered close-knit communities that could defend their own space. The strategic genius of the medieval street wasn't just in holding a wall. It was in understanding that the very shape of a community could be its strongest shield. But the medieval mind understood that defense wasn't just about confusion, it was also about control. While winding alleys excelled at baffling invaders, a different geometric strategy emerged to command a town from within, the radial plan. Imagine a spiderweb etched into the landscape with all threads leading back to a single, powerful center. This is the essence of radial design, where streets burst outward from a central castle, cathedral, or market square like sunbeams. While the star-shaped fortress of Pomonova, Italy, is a Renaissance masterpiece, its underlying principle of absolute control was deeply rooted in medieval thought. This layout was a dramatic declaration of power, transforming the entire town into an extension of its core institution. Urban theorist Spiro Kostov brilliantly captured this intent, stating that radial plans expressed power. The center commanded the periphery. The military advantages were immense and deliberate. From a central keep or a high church tower, watchmen enjoyed unobstructed sightlines down every major artery. Any disturbance, any sign of an approaching threat could be spotted instantly. This network of straight, wide roads also allowed for the rapid deployment of garrison troops to any point on the defensive perimeter, turning the town into an efficient machine for moving force. The concentric circles of walls found in fortified towns like Aigues-Mortes in France took this a step further, creating layered zones of defense. An attacker who breached the outer wall wouldn't find themselves in the city, but trapped in a deadly killing zone between that wall and an even taller, stronger inner one, exposed to fire from all sides. This geometry also organized daily life with hierarchical clarity. The main radial arteries were reserved for important movement, soldiers, merchants, religious processions. The spaces between these spokes were then filled with a secondary, finer grain of narrower local lanes and cul-de-sacs for residential traffic, creating a clear distinction between public grandeur and private community. This wasn't just practical, it was profoundly symbolic. The design physically reinforced the feudal and religious order. Every road literally led to the seat of power, whether that was the castle of the local lord or the house of God. It was a constant, unconscious reminder to every citizen of where authority resided and of their place within that social structure. The beautifully preserved Bastide town of Montpensier in France showcases this marriage of utility and order. Its precise grid, centered on a large central square, functions like a radial plan in its clarity and focus, demonstrating how geometric precision could facilitate both market commerce and communal control. It's fascinating to see how these ancient concepts of controlled flow and centralized observation echo in our modern world. The roundabout, a circular intersection designed to keep traffic moving smoothly, operates on a similar principle of directing movement around a central point. and the design of many capital cities with grand avenues radiating from government buildings or national monuments continues to use urban geometry to project authority and ideology. This strategic use of shape to manage both people and power seamlessly paved the way for geometry to express ideas far beyond the battlefield. Yet for all the strategic genius of winding alleys and radial command, another powerful geometric idea was taking root across medieval Europe, one that reached back to ancient Rome to build a very different kind of future. Step into the vibrant heart of a medieval market town like Freiburg on a busy trading day. Instead of a confusing labyrinth, you find yourself in a spacious, rectangular square, the Münsterplatz. Orderly, straight streets branch off from it at perfect right angles, creating a clear and predictable pattern. This is the gridiron plan or orthogonal planning, and it represents a deliberate turn away from defensive chaos toward economic efficiency and social organization. While the serpentine lanes were designed to baffle, these straight streets were built to facilitate. They enabled carts and merchants to move goods swiftly and directly, prevented the crushing congestion that could choke a market's vitality, and allowed authorities to monitor and manage the flow of people and commerce with ease. The economic historian Henry Payan saw this clearly, noting that grids enabled predictable flow of goods and people, boosting commerce. This wasn't merely a revival of Roman aesthetics. It was a pragmatic adoption of a system that worked brilliantly for trade, taxation, and even public health. The advantages of this geometric order were multifaceted and profoundly practical. First and foremost, the grid reduced congestion. Wide, straight main thoroughfares could handle heavy cart traffic moving to and from the central market square, while a parallel network of narrower secondary lanes provided access to residential and artisan quarters. This separation of flows prevented the logjams that were common in more organic, unplanned towns. Secondly, the grid allowed for equitable and easily divisible plots of land. When a new town was founded, the land could be neatly parceled out into standard-sized lots for settlers, making the process of leasing, selling, and inheriting property straightforward and transparent. This predictability was a powerful incentive for attracting merchants and craftsmen to new settlements. Furthermore, the orthogonal layout had significant benefits for public health. The straight streets, often aligned to prevailing winds, acted as ventilation corridors, allowing smoke and foul odors from workshops and homes to be carried away more effectively than in cramped, enclosed alleys. This improved air circulation was a primitive but crucial form of urban sanitation. The design also aided in fire prevention. Wider streets could act as fire breaks, helping to stop the spread of the blazes that periodically devastated medieval towns built of wood and thatch. This philosophy of planned order is perfectly exemplified by the Bastides of southwestern France. These were new towns, built from scratch in the 13th and 14th centuries, often as joint ventures between a local lord and a king. Their uniform grid plans were tools of economic and political control. Towns like Montauban or Cordes were laid out with meticulous geometric precision around a central market square, their streets forming a perfect grid that maximized the number of valuable market-front properties and ensured every citizen had equal access to the commercial heart. Each plot was identical, a physical manifestation of the relatively equitable legal status offered to the settlers who would live and trade there. Across the Channel in England, the planned port of New Winchelsea tells a similar story. After the old town was lost to coastal erosion, King Edward I ordered a new one built on a nearby hill. Its strict grid plan was directly tied to its economic purpose, the efficient import and taxation of wine from Gascony. The large, regular cellars built under each identical house plot were not an afterthought. They were the very reason for the town's geometric design, a masterclass in how urban form can be shaped by a single, driving economic engine. This stark intentionality makes you pause and consider our modern approach. Today's suburban sprawl often feels like the opposite of this medieval foresight, a haphazard, car-dependent expansion that prioritizes private space over public utility and often lacks a coherent center altogether. The medieval grid, by contrast, was intensely focused on creating a functional, communal heart. It proves that geometric order, far from being sterile or impersonal, could be a powerful tool for fostering economic vitality and social cohesion, setting the stage for the next layer of meaning to be embedded within the stone and mortar of the medieval street. Yet beyond the pragmatic world of markets and military strategy lay a deeper, more profound dimension of medieval street design, one that sought to connect the earthly realm to the celestial. If the previous geometries were maps of power and commerce, these were maps of the soul, carefully charted to reflect a divine order believed to be woven into the very fabric of the universe. Envision yourself not as a merchant or a soldier, but as a pilgrim standing at a crossroads in the shadow of Chartres Cathedral. As the sun rises on the summer solstice, its light pours directly down the main avenue, a blazing path that seems to ignite the cathedral's famed rose window. This was no happy accident. It was a deliberate act of sacred alignment, embedding the rhythm of the cosmos into the daily life of the town, turning a simple street into a pathway of heavenly light. This practice of infusing urban geometry with spiritual meaning stems from the medieval worldview that saw the microcosm of the city as a reflection of the macrocosm of God's creation. Scholars like Keith Critchlow help us understand this mindset, explaining that medieval planners saw streets as pathways to God, mirroring the cosmos. They worked with principles of sacred geometry, using mathematical ratios believed to be divinely inspired, such as the golden section, to determine the proportions of public squares, the width of streets, and the angles of intersections. These ratios were thought to create a visual and spatial harmony that resonated with the fundamental order of creation, making the city itself a place of spiritual resonance and balance. Walking through a town planned with these principles was meant to be an aesthetic and devotional experience, a constant, subtle reminder of a higher reality. This symbolic intent manifested in several powerful ways. The most straightforward was the axial alignment of major streets directly with the entrance of the town's primary church or cathedral. This transformed the approach to the church into a processional route, a physical and spiritual journey from the profane world of commerce and daily strife toward the sacred threshold of redemption. The very act of walking down that street was a form of pilgrimage, preparing the soul for worship. The crossroads itself, the intersection of two paths, held immense symbolic weight. It was often marked by a stone cross or a shrine, representing the intersection of the human and the divine, a point of decision and spiritual significance far beyond its traffic function. We see this concept elevated to its grandest scale in the design of pilgrimage routes. The entire street network leading to a site like the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Spain functioned as a vast continental-scale symbol. The final streets a pilgrim walked in the city were meticulously designed to build anticipation and focus the mind solely on the approaching spiritual goal, with every curve and vista calculated to enhance the transformative experience of arrival. Even older cities, whose layouts medieval planners inherited, were interpreted and adapted through this spiritual lens. While the labyrinthine streets of Jerusalem's Old City predate the Middle Ages, medieval crusaders and mapmakers saw its complex layout as a symbolic representation of the difficult path to salvation. They mapped its streets onto their own religious consciousness, influencing how they later designed symbolic elements in European towns. This deep integration of faith and form challenges us to look at our own urban environments. In an age of efficient but often soulless grid plans, how can we reintegrate this sense of meaning, creating spaces that don't just move people efficiently, but also nourish the human spirit and connect us to something larger than ourselves? Now, let's shift our focus from the strategic to the soulful, from the physical battlefield to the landscape of the spirit. While some streets were designed to defend the body, others were crafted to elevate the mind and guide the soul on a journey inward. Picture a weary pilgrim, their feet dusty and sore, ascending the steep, zigzagging path to the sacred cliffside sanctuary of Recapturing in France. With each deliberate turn of the winding route, the bustling world below seems to fade away. The very act of navigating this complex upward path becomes a form of active meditation, a physical metaphor for the difficult, non-linear path toward spiritual enlightenment. This was the profound power of the Labyrinthine street. It transformed the simple act of walking into a sacred pilgrimage, a symbolic quest for meaning woven directly into the urban fabric. This was no accident of planning. The medieval world was deeply fascinated by the symbol of the labyrinth. As art historian Émile Mail observed, the labyrinth was a medieval motif for the soul's journey through sin to redemption. This powerful idea was etched into the floors of great cathedrals like Chartres, where pilgrims might trace the path on their knees as a substitute for a long journey to Jerusalem. But this same symbolic thinking was applied outdoors on a grand urban scale. The confusing, maze-like layout of certain towns was intentionally designed to mimic this spiritual puzzle. The goal was not to reach a center quickly, but to experience the transformative power of the journey itself, the wrong turns, the moments of disorientation, and the ultimate triumphant arrival. This geometry was a lesson in patience, humility, and faith. This symbolic intent manifested in several subtle yet powerful architectural choices. Planners would often place small shrines or oratories at dead ends or at sharp turns in the road. This transformed a practical cul-de-sac from a simple navigational error into an opportunity for unexpected prayer and reflection, a divine surprise around a blind corner. The winding paths themselves served to physically slow the traveler down, forcing a contemplative pace upon them. In a world before cars and haste, this design encouraged people to be present, to observe their surroundings, and to sit with their thoughts. This was especially potent in monastic towns, where the entire community was dedicated to a life of contemplation. The street layout itself reinforced monastic ideals of separation from the worldly and the focused pursuit of an inner life, creating a physical barrier against the rush and distraction of the outside world. We can find beautiful, though often subtle, examples of this. While true spiral street patterns are rare, elements of them appear in places like the old town of Brno in the Czech Republic, where circular arrangements of streets echo ancient symbols of cosmic cycles, rebirth, and inner transformation. A more striking example is the iconic skyline of San Gimignano in Italy. While famous for its medieval towers, the experience of its streets is equally symbolic. The narrow, shadowy alleys weave between these soaring stone structures, constantly drawing the eye upward. The journey through the town feels less like a horizontal movement and more like a vertical ascent, a physical climbing toward the heavens that mirrors the soul's aspiration toward God. The geometry of the town itself becomes a prayer in stone, guiding the visitor not just to a piazza but toward a state of mind. This rich history of intentional design poses a vital question for our own time. In our modern cities, built for maximum efficiency and speed, have we sacrificed this capacity for mindfulness and spiritual encounter? Our wide, straight highways are designed to get us from point A to point B as quickly as possible, often obliterating any sense of place or journey in between. The medieval understanding that the path itself holds meaning offers a powerful alternative. It challenges us to consider whether we can design spaces that once again encourage contemplation, that invite wanderings both physical and mental, and that recognize the profound impact our built environment has on our inner lives. This deep, metaphorical layer of street geometry seamlessly introduces us to how these same shapes were also used to enforce a very earthly kind of order, the social hierarchy of the medieval world. Yet the design of medieval streets went far beyond spiritual metaphor. It was also a powerful, tangible tool for reinforcing the rigid social hierarchies that defined the era. This wasn't a subtle suggestion of class difference, it was a physical reality built into the very dimensions of the urban landscape. Envision the stark contrast, a magnificent, broad avenue paved with smooth stone, leading directly to the soaring facade of a cathedral. This is the Via Sacra, the sacred way, designed for grand processions where nobility and clergy could display their wealth and power in full view of the populace. Now, just a few steps away, duck into a shadowy alley so narrow you can touch both walls at once. The air is thick with the smells of tanning leather and forge fires. The ground underfoot is muddy and uneven. This is the vicus, the lane of the common craftsman, the butcher, the weaver. This dramatic disparity in width, light, and accessibility was not an accident of urban growth. It was a deliberate geometric strategy to manifest and maintain the social order. As the sociologist Richard Sennett powerfully observes, urban form is never neutral, it encodes power relations. The width of a street was a direct reflection of the status of those who used it, a constant, daily reminder to every citizen of their place in the world. This encoding of power into pavement worked on several distinct levels. Most obviously, the main thoroughfares were reserved for the movement of the elite and for the sacred ceremonies that upheld their authority. These wide streets allowed for the spectacle of power, the parade of a nightly retinue, the religious procession displaying holy relics, the arrival of a visiting monarch. Their straight lines conveyed order, control, and deliberate intent, reflecting the divine right and organized authority of the ruling class. In direct opposition, the cramped, winding lanes of the artisan and laborer quarters were often perceived as chaotic, messy, and even morally suspect. The curves and irregularities that served so well for defense also conveniently kept the lower classes out of sight and symbolically out of mind, except when their labor was required. This physical segregation was often hardened by the strategic placement of gates and barriers. Districts within a city could be closed off at night, not just for security against external threats, but for internal control, ensuring that the social classes did not mix freely and that movement was restricted after dark. We can see this hierarchical blueprint laid out with stunning clarity in a city like medieval Bruges. The city center, with its enormous market square and the towering belfry, was connected to the outer gates by a network of relatively straight, merchant-friendly streets. But radiating from this core was a dense web of narrow alleys leading to the canals, where the docks and the workshops of the less prosperous were located. The difference between the mercantile core and the industrial periphery was written in stone and space. An even more precise example comes from Florence, Italy. The Roman foundation of the city left a legacy of wide, straight streets, the Via Publici. After the Roman era, the medieval city grew within this skeleton. The wealthy patrician families built their towering palazzos directly on these grand old roads, claiming the legacy of ancient order and prestige for themselves. Meanwhile, the spaces between these major arteries were filled in with a tangled warren of tiny streets, the vicoli, where the vast majority of the city's population lived and worked in much humbler conditions. The geometric plan of the city was a perfect map of its social stratification. This historical use of urban design to separate and control invites a pointed reflection on our own time. While we may not have formal gates segregating neighborhoods, the modern equivalent is perhaps even more powerful because it is often less visible. Think of the gated community with its controlled access points, private roads, and uniform landscaping creating a separate, ordered world for its residents. Or consider how major highways and infrastructure projects in the 20th century were often deliberately routed to create physical barriers between affluent and impoverished neighborhoods, cementing economic and racial divisions in concrete and asphalt. The medieval impulse to use the layout of a city to enforce a social order is not a relic of the past. It has simply evolved into new forms, challenging us to consider who our own urban geometry is designed to serve and who it is designed to overlook. This conscious shaping of society through stone and street seamlessly leads us to consider another fundamental and often overriding force in urban design: the immutable power of the natural landscape itself. While the previous strategies reveal a profound human intention to shape the urban environment, we must never forget the most powerful co-designer of all, the earth itself. The natural landscape was the silent, unyielding partner in every medieval planning decision, its contours and resources dictating the fundamental grammar of street geometry in ways that pure human strategy could never override. Climb with me up the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, Scotland. This is not a street designed on a flat parchment. It is a spine of stone ruthlessly grafted onto a volcanic crag. Its steep, terraced ascent wasn't a stylistic choice but a necessary adaptation, maximizing buildable space on a precipitous slope while simultaneously creating a formidable defensive approach. Any invader fighting their way uphill would be exhausted and exposed, while defenders above held every advantage. This is the essence of medieval adaptation geography, was not an obstacle to be conquered, but a collaborator to be embraced. The geographer J.B. Jackson perfectly captured this respectful relationship, noting that the land itself taught medieval builders where to place streets. This dialogue between builder and landscape took countless forms, each region developing a unique architectural language spoken in the accent of its local terrain. In riverside towns like Prague, the Vltava River was the city's lifeblood, and the street network bowed to its will. The famous curves of the streets in the old town don't just follow the river's bank, they trace the paths of ancient tributaries and the contours of the floodplain, creating an organic, flowing pattern that feels inherently connected to the water. Conversely, hilltop settlements like San Marino in Italy or Rocamadour in France employed a completely different geometric vocabulary, the switchback. Streets zigzag up the mountainside in a series of sharp, punishing turns. This wasn't just for gradual ascent. It was a practical solution for allowing carts and animals to navigate otherwise impossible gradients, turning a sheer cliff face into an accessible, livable community. The very shape of the street was a direct answer to the question posed by the mountain. Beyond mere accessibility, the land provided ready-made defenses and essential resources. A river wasn't just a transport route, it was a natural moat. A steep cliff face was a pre-built, impregnable wall. Planners were masters of working with these gifts, siting towns to leverage these natural barriers and then supplementing them with man-made fortifications. Drainage was another silent dictator of street form. In the absence of complex underground sewage systems, street gradients were meticulously calculated to channel rainwater and waste away from homes and public squares, down toward natural runoff points like rivers or gullies. The gentle camber of a medieval lane is often a subtle record of centuries of hydrological problem solving. We see this principle beautifully along coastlines where the geography of trade took precedence. In ports like Visby on the Swedish island of Gotland, the street plan radiates directly from the harbor, the town's economic heart. The main arteries run perpendicular to the shore, allowing for the swift movement of goods from ship to warehouse, while a concentric ring road parallels the coast, connecting the various docks and markets. The entire geometry of the town is an echo of the shoreline. Perhaps no city exemplifies this harmonious blend of terrain and cultural influence better than Toledo, Spain. Perched on a granite hill and encircled by a tight bend in the Tagus River, its natural defenses are spectacular, but its street geometry tells a richer story. The Moorish influence is palpable in the incredibly narrow, shaded, and irregular lanes of the Jewish quarter, a design perfected for hot climates, creating cooling canyon-like passages and maximizing shade. These streets seem to grow directly from the rock, twisting and turning with a chaotic logic that confounds outsiders but provided a cool, defensible, and intimate urban fabric. Later medieval Christian additions had to adapt to this existing, terrain-hugging layout, resulting in a city that is a literal stratification of geological and human history. Its streets are a map of both the hill it sits on and the cultures that have called it home. This deep, respectful integration of nature and urbanism stands in stark contrast to much of modern planning, where the first step is often to bulldoze and flatten the land into submission. The medieval approach offers a powerful lesson in sustainability and resilience. Instead of fighting against a floodplain, they built with it. Instead of viewing a hill as a problem, they saw it as an opportunity. In an era of climate change, where managing water and energy are paramount, perhaps we need to relearn this ancient language of listening to the landscape, of allowing the natural world to once again become a collaborator in designing our towns and cities, rather than a canvas to be dominated. But these grand designs of defense and symbolism, these elegant curves and commanding radials, all had to be translated from imagination into reality using the most fundamental of elements, the very earth beneath the builder's feet and the stone and timber they could wrest from it. The choice of materials was the ultimate dictator of form, a powerful constraint that shaped the width, the curvature, and even the very lifespan of a medieval street. Picture the iconic shambles in York, England, not just as a charmingly crooked lane, but as a testament to local geology. Those narrow, winding paths are paved with massive, uneven slabs of local millstone grit, a tough, durable stone that could withstand centuries of cartwheels and foot traffic. The tightness of the street, the way the timber-framed buildings seemed to lean in towards each other, wasn't just a defensive choice. It was a direct result of building with heavy, bulky stone that was difficult to transport and shape. The material itself guided the geometry, creating those intimate, canyon-like passages that feel so uniquely medieval. As archaeologist John Schofield reminds us, medieval builders worked with what they had, creating beauty through necessity. They were masters of local sourcing, and their material choices created stark regional contrasts in urban form. Travel to Scandinavia, and you find a completely different streetscape. In towns like Bergen, Norway, or Visby, Sweden, timber was the abundant resource. This led to a more flexible, organic form of urban planning. Streets could be laid out and adjusted with relative ease, buildings could be expanded, and entire lanes could be rebuilt after a fire. The geometry was less permanent, more adaptable, resulting in the wonderfully irregular, almost fluid layouts of these northern cities. Compare this to the heart of Tuscany, in towns like San Gimignano or Volterra, where the local Pietra Serena, a grey sandstone, allowed for something far more angular and permanent. The wealth of these Italian city-states was literally set in stone, enabling straighter, wider streets, more precise right angles, and a sense of geometric order that reflected both Roman heritage and civic pride. The very feel underfoot was different, the solid, unwavering nature of stone versus the slightly springy, more forgiving surface of a timber-built street. The construction techniques went far beyond the surface you walked on. The foundation of a street was a critical piece of engineering that directly influenced its geometry and function. Builders would dig a trench and lay a foundation of rubble, broken pottery, and gravel. This base layer, known as the agger in Roman tradition, was crucial for drainage. Its depth and composition determined how well a street would handle rainwater, preventing it from turning into a muddy quagmire. The camber, or slight convex curve of the street surface, was meticulously calculated to channel water toward gutters or central drains, a subtle geometric feature vital for public health. This attention to detail shows a sophisticated understanding of hydraulics long before modern plumbing. The process was often guided by the powerful craft guilds. These organizations weren't just about controlling trade. They played a direct role in shaping the urban fabric. Mason guilds might standardize the width of certain types of streets or the size of paving stones to ensure quality and consistency. In a city like Strasbourg, which beautifully blended Germanic and French influences, we see this interplay of material and regulation. The city's famous half-timbered thatchwork buildings created streets with dramatic overhangs, making the lanes below feel even narrower and more enclosed. The guilds would have regulated these projections, the fire-resistant materials used in party walls, and the maintenance of the public way in front of each property, ensuring that private construction served the public good and adhered to a shared vision of urban order. Perhaps no case study better illustrates this evolution of materials than London. In the early medieval period, its streets were little more than muddy tracks that followed ancient desire paths. As the city grew wealthier, a transformation began. The first improvements were simple wooden planks laid down in the busiest areas to provide a stable walking surface. Later, these were replaced with more durable gravel, but the real change came in the 13th and 14th centuries, when the city began a concerted effort to pave its main thoroughfares with stone. This was a monumental civic undertaking. The city passed ordinances requiring homeowners to maintain the pavement in front of their properties, and specific taxes were levied to pay for the paving of public spaces. This material progress fundamentally altered the city's geometry. What were once wide, undefined muddy expanses that ebbed and flowed with the weather became fixed, narrow, stone-lined channels. The new, solid surfaces allowed for more precise property lines, more permanent market stalls, and a more predictable flow of traffic. The very definition of public space was hardened, literally, in stone. This historical reliance on local, durable, and repairable materials offers a profound lesson for our modern era of disposable construction and global supply chains. Medieval towns were the epitome of a circular economy. Stone was quarried locally, timber was harvested from nearby forests, and when buildings fell, their materials were scavenged and reused for generations. There was no such thing as waste. Everything had value and could be repurposed. This inherent sustainability, born from necessity, resulted in incredibly resilient urban environments that have endured for centuries. It challenges us to think about our own material choices. Could we design our streetscapes to be more adaptable, using local materials that age gracefully and can be easily maintained or repurposed? Instead of imposing a one-size-fits-all geometric plan, Could we allow local geology and ecology to once again inform the character of our towns, creating places that are not only efficient, but are also deeply and authentically rooted in their place? If you were to walk from the twisting, seemingly haphazard lanes of an English village like Castle Commet into the stern, orderly grid of a northern German town like Lübeck, you would feel as if you had stepped into two entirely different worlds. Yet both are quintessentially medieval. This breathtaking diversity in street geometry wasn't random. It was the physical handwriting of distinct cultures, each using urban form to express its deepest beliefs, priorities, and identity. The renowned historian Norman Pound saw this clearly, observing that each region's streets tell a story of its people and their priorities. From the sun-drenched plazas of Italy to the fog-shrouded ports of the Baltic, the layout of a town was its autobiography, written in the language of curves, angles, and intersections. This cultural storytelling through stone and earth is perhaps most vividly illustrated in the dramatic contrast between the organic and the planned. In England, many towns grew slowly over centuries from Anglo-Saxon settlements. Their street patterns often followed the ancient, worn paths of cattle drives and foot traffic, curving around great oak trees, property boundaries, and natural springs. The result is an intimate, almost whimsical geometry that feels deeply human in scale, a testament to a society that valued gradual, communal evolution. Now cross the North Sea to the towns of the Hanseatic League, a powerful network of merchant guilds that dominated Baltic trade. In outposts like Tallinn or Rostock, you find the opposite impulse. These were towns built for business, often erected rapidly on new sites to control trade routes. Their street plans are rigid, efficient grids, centered on a massive market square large enough for hundreds of merchants to display their goods. This was geometry as commercial engine, reflecting a culture whose identity was forged in commerce and collective, corporate organization. The wide, straight streets weren't for spiritual processions. They were for moving timber, wool, and amber from the docks to the warehouse with maximum efficiency. Venture further south, and the cultural imprints become even more distinct. In the sun-baked heart of Andalusia, Spain, the Islamic influence on towns like Cordoba or Granada is unmistakable. Here, the priority was not defense or commerce, but climate control and privacy. The streets transform into an intricate web of narrow, shaded alleys, often covered with wooden lattices or awnings to create a cool, canyon-like environment protected from the fierce sun. These passages frequently lead to sudden, surprising courtyards bursting with greenery, and the sound of fountains, a private oasis hidden from the public way. This intricate, inward-focused geometry reflects the cultural values of interiority, family privacy, and the creation of comfortable microclimates, a direct legacy of centuries of Moorish rule. Now travel northwest to the old Viking settlement of Dublin. Archaeological evidence reveals a very different pattern, a series of circular forts and enclosed compounds with long, linear properties running down to the river Liffey. This layout speaks to a Norse societal structure based on extended family clans, each controlling its own defined territory with direct access to the water, their primary highway for trade and raids. The hands that shaped these urban forms were not anonymous. Often, it was the will of a local ruler imposing their vision to project power or attract settlers. When King Alfonso VI of Castile recaptured the town of Cuenca from the Moors, he didn't simply move in, he reorganized it. He imposed a new, more regular street plan atop the existing Muslim layout, carving out space for a grand cathedral and a central plaza, a powerful geometric statement of Christian reconquest and royal authority. Similarly, in the bustling city-states of Italy, urban geometry became a source of immense civic pride. rival families built towering palazzos that leaned over the streets, their height and proximity turning the avenues below into dramatic, canyon-like stages for public life. The precise alignment of streets in a city like Florence or Siena was a point of municipal pride, a reflection of wealth, sophistication, and a conscious revival of Roman ideals, demonstrating that they were the true heirs to classical civilization. Perhaps one of the most intriguing examples of culturally coded geometry can be found in parts of Eastern Europe, in towns like Zamość in Poland or Karlovac in Croatia. These settlements, often built during the Renaissance but reflecting late medieval defensive thinking, were laid out in perfect star-shaped patterns. This was more than just a military innovation, it was a powerful symbol. The star was a potent emblem of the ideal city, a representation of cosmic order and harmony, a geometric declaration that even on the wild frontier, human reason and divine order could prevail. The very shape of the town was a manifesto, blending the practical necessity of defense with a profound symbolic statement about the society it aimed to protect and foster. This incredible tapestry of regional variation forces a poignant question about our own era. In a world of accelerating globalization, where international architectural firms design glass and steel towers for cities from Dubai to Dallas, what becomes of local identity? The medieval street was an authentic expression of its place, its climate, its materials, its history, and its people's worldview. When every new development looks the same, are we losing the ability to tell our own stories through the places we build? The unique geometric fingerprints of medieval towns stand as a powerful reminder that our built environment is not just a collection of structures, but the physical embodiment of who we are, what we value, and how we see our place in the world. Yet the very permanence of stone and timber can be deceiving, suggesting these street patterns were frozen in time the moment they were laid down. Nothing could be further from the truth. A medieval town was not a museum exhibit but a living, breathing entity, its streets constantly reshaped by the relentless pressures of growth, disaster, and innovation. Think of a city like Paris, beginning as a modest settlement on the Isle de la Cité. Its first streets were a tight knot of lanes confined to that small island in the Seine. But as the population swelled, it burst its banks, spilling out onto the right and left banks. Each time a new protective wall was built to encircle the expanding city, the entire street network had to adapt. New market squares emerged at gateways, old roads were extended to connect to new suburbs, and the geometry of the entire metropolis evolved in concentric rings, each layer recording a different chapter of its history. This concept of the city as a dynamic organism was perfectly captured by urban planner Patrick Geddes, who reminded us that cities are organisms that grow and change. Their form was never final. It was a continuous negotiation between the original design and the inevitable forces of time. This adaptation was driven by a constant stream of practical challenges. As wheeled carts became the dominant mode for moving heavy goods, the narrow, winding lanes that once sufficed for pedestrians and pack animals became intolerable bottlenecks. This led to a widespread, if gradual, process of street widening. Buildings that encroached on the public way were pushed back, and new thoroughfares were sometimes carved through older neighborhoods to create more efficient routes for commerce. Public health crises, particularly the repeated horrors of the bubonic plague, also forced geometric changes. In the aftermath of these devastating outbreaks, there was a greater awareness of the connection between crowded, unsanitary conditions and disease. Some city councils initiated sanitation reforms, straightening and widening streets to improve air circulation and sunlight, believing that fresh air could help dispel the miasmas thought to cause illness. They might also create more deliberate quarantine zones, controlling access to certain streets to isolate the sick. And then there were the Great Fires, an ever-present threat in cities built of wood and thatch. A catastrophic blaze, while tragic, often presented a rare opportunity for wholesale urban redesign. Instead of simply rebuilding the same crooked lanes on the old property lines, authorities could impose a new, more regular order, creating wider streets that would act as fire breaks for the future. Perhaps no single technological shift had a more dramatic impact on medieval urban geometry than the arrival of gunpowder artillery. The high, relatively thin stone walls that had deflected trebuchet stones for centuries were suddenly obsolete against the cannonball. This military revolution demanded a complete rethinking of urban defense, which in turn radically altered the relationship between a city and its streets. The new defensive ideal was the low, thick, earth-backed bastion, capable of absorbing cannon fire and providing a platform for defensive cannons of their own. These massive, angular structures required vast amounts of space. To build them, old neighborhoods nestled right up against the inside of the city walls were often demolished, their streets erased. The new defensive perimeter pushed outward, and the streets leading to it were now designed with different considerations. The angles of approach for attacking cannon became a primary concern, influencing the orientation of entire new districts. The very purpose of a street's curve shifted. It was less about creating close-range ambushes for men-at-arms and more about managing lines of sight and fields of fire for heavy artillery. We can trace this fascinating evolution not just in response to catastrophe, but through peaceful economic progress in a city like Ghent. Originally a scattering of monastic settlements and trade posts along the Scheldt and Ley rivers, Ghent grew into one of Europe's largest cities thanks to its booming cloth trade. Its early street pattern was a classic organic tangle, following the waterways and ancient paths. But as its wealth and political power grew, the city undertook a centuries-long process of regularization. Canals were straightened and widened to accommodate more shipping, and the streets alongside them were often straightened in turn to facilitate the movement of goods from the docks to the guild halls and markets. The laying out of new, planned squares like the Vredagmarkt Friday Market created formal nodes of civic and commercial power that demanded straighter, more dignified access routes. The geometry of Ghent slowly transformed from a purely functional, emergent pattern into a more intentional design that reflected its status as a confident, wealthy, and self-aware metropolitan power. This historical view of urban adaptability forces a critical question about our own time. Modern cities face their own existential threats, from climate change and rising sea levels to the social disruptions of digitalization and shifting economies. Our challenge is strikingly similar to the medieval one: how to adapt the physical fabric of our inherited cities to meet entirely new sets of demands. When we discuss managed retreat from coastlines, the creation of green flood zones, or the pedestrianization of downtown cores to combat pollution and congestion, we are engaging in the same essential practice as those medieval planners who widened streets after a plague or straightened them after a fire. We are recognizing that the urban form is not sacred and immutable, but a tool that must be continually reshaped to serve the living community. This continuous, dynamic conversation between the past and the present ensures that the story of a city's streets is never truly finished. Now consider the vibrant heart of a medieval city on market day, but not just any square, the cobbled expanse directly before the towering facade of Cologne Cathedral. The air is thick with the scent of spices and baking bread, the cacophony of merchants hawking their wares mingling with the distant chant of monks from within the church. This was not a case of the sacred and the secular existing in separate spheres. They were intimately, inextricably intertwined, and the very geometry of the streets was the physical proof of this partnership. The historian David Nicholas saw this profound connection clearly, noting that the church and market were twin poles around which medieval urban life revolved. This wasn't a mere coexistence, it was an active collaboration where spirituality and commerce fueled and shaped one another, creating an urban landscape designed to serve both the soul and the purse. This dynamic interplay manifested most visibly in the design of processional routes. These were not merely streets, they were stages for the most important rituals of communal life, and their width, straightness, and termination points were meticulously planned. On a major feast day, a religious procession would emerge from the cathedral's west door. It would then proceed down the widest, most direct avenue, which invariably led to the central market square. This was a deliberate symbolic journey, moving from the house of God into the heart of the community's economic life, blessing the commerce that sustained the town. The route itself was often cleaned and decorated for the occasion, transforming a practical commercial artery into a sacred pathway. This geometric connection ensured that even the most mundane act of buying a loaf of bread was physically and visually linked to the spiritual core of the city, a constant reminder that daily survival and divine grace were two sides of the same coin. The design of the squares themselves reveals this dual purpose. The wide, open plaza in front of a great church served multiple, simultaneous functions. It was a narthex, an overflow space for congregants on high holy days. It was a public forum for town meetings and proclamations, and it was, permanently or on scheduled days, a marketplace. This multifunctional design required a specific geometry. The square had to be large enough to accommodate crowds and stalls, but its proportions were often consciously designed to frame the church facade, making the building the undeniable visual anchor of the space. The placement of a market cross at the center of these squares is a perfect symbol of this fusion. This stone structure served a practical purpose as a designated spot for transactions and official announcements, but it was also a potent religious symbol, marking the space as sanctified and placing commerce under divine protection. The cross was often aligned on a direct sightline with the main entrance of the church, creating a visual and symbolic axis that physically connected the act of trade with the doorway to salvation. We can see this principle executed with beautiful clarity in the planned city of Salisbury, England. Unlike many towns that grew organically, Salisbury was laid out in the 13th century with a clear geometric vision. The streets form a precise grid, but the most striking feature is the way the main avenues radiate outward from the two central poles of city life, the enormous cathedral and the adjacent market square. The streets literally draw people from the outskirts directly into this dual nucleus. You couldn't go to the market without passing the cathedral, and you couldn't visit the cathedral without being immersed in the market's activity. This was urban planning as a statement of belief, asserting that the spiritual and economic health of the community were interdependent and deserved an equally central and dignified place in the city's design. Similarly, in Canterbury, the entire street network was heavily influenced by its status as a premier pilgrimage destination. The main routes into the city converged on the cathedral, and the streets nearest the shrine were lined with shops selling pilgrim badges, relics, and accommodations. The geometry was economically optimized to channel pious spending, yet it also facilitated the spiritual journey, creating a seamless experience from the city gate to the tomb of Thomas Becket. This historical model of integrated space presents a powerful challenge to our modern urban experience, where zoning laws have often rigidly separated churches, shops, and homes into distinct districts. We drive to a shopping mall in one part of town and to a place of worship in another, losing the rich, accidental interactions and the sense of community that comes from shared space. The medieval approach suggests that vitality springs from mixture, from allowing different aspects of human life to occupy the same ground and inform one another. How can we reintroduce this philosophy into contemporary design? Perhaps it means prioritizing mixed-use developments that place cafes, small shops, and public plazas near libraries and community centers, creating new kinds of civic hearts that, while not explicitly religious, foster a similar sense of communal gathering and shared purpose. The medieval street reminds us that the most successful urban spaces are those that cater to the whole human being. Our need for both sustenance and spirit, for commerce and community, woven together in a single, vibrant geometric tapestry. While the grand cathedrals and fortified walls capture our imagination, the true lifeblood of any medieval settlement was something far more fundamental: fresh, accessible water. This simple, vital necessity became a powerful, often invisible force shaping the very curves and angles of the street plan. Envision the intricate web of canals in medieval Bruges, their dark, reflective surfaces mirroring the stepped gables of the merchants' houses. The streets here don't fight against the water, they embrace it, bending and branching to follow these liquid highways for trade and to access the countless bridges that served as both crossing points and social hubs. This was urban planning in deep partnership with hydrology, a practical strategy where geometry was dictated by the unyielding logic of survival and hygiene. As engineering historian Terry S. Reynolds rightly emphasizes, water management was a cornerstone of medieval urban design. This wasn't a minor consideration, it was a central pillar around which the entire community was organized. The engineering behind this water-driven geometry was remarkably sophisticated. Drainage was the first and most pressing concern. In the absence of underground sewer systems, medieval builders became masters of grading. They calculated street gradients with meticulous care, ensuring that rainwater and waste would flow away from public squares and residential areas, channeled through shallow gutters carved into the cobblestones or down the center of unpaved lane. This gentle camber, almost imperceptible to the eye, was a geometric feature of immense importance, directing runoff toward natural soakaways, nearby streams, or purpose-built drainage ditches that encircled the town. This careful management of water flow was a primitive but effective form of public health defense, crucial for preventing the stagnant pools that bred disease. Furthermore, the placement of a bridge was a monumental decision that could redirect an entire street network. A new bridge across a river didn't just connect two banks, it became an instant economic magnet, a choke point of commerce that demanded new streets to funnel traffic toward it, often reshaping the urban fabric for generations. To manage water flow without disrupting street-level traffic, medieval engineers frequently employed culverts, stone-lined tunnels buried beneath major thoroughfares. These hidden architectural feats allowed streams to be channeled underground, enabling expansion into new areas while preserving the vital surface routes for carts and pedestrians. This relationship with water extended beyond basic sanitation into the very economic engine of the town. The power of flowing water was harnessed by mills, and the placement of these industrial structures had a direct impact on street orientation. A mill required a reliable and controlled flow of water, often necessitating the construction of a mill race, a dedicated canal that diverted water from a river. The path of this mill race could dictate the layout of entire districts, with streets aligning along its banks to provide access for carts delivering grain and collecting flour. The constant hum and rumble of the mill became an auditory landmark, and the streets leading to it were inevitably worn wide and deep by the steady traffic of commerce it generated. Even public fountains, those elegant civic monuments, held a powerful geometric influence. They were never placed at random. Strategically located at major intersections or at the terminus of a key street, a public fountain was more than just a source of fresh water. It was a symbolic anchor point for the community. Its placement created a natural gathering spot, a node of social interaction that reinforced the importance of the crossroads itself. The constant flow of water from its spigots mirrored the flow of people through the streets, a daily reminder of the resource that made urban life possible. While Venice is a unique and extreme example of a city built on water, its principles reflect a magnified version of the challenges faced by medieval planners everywhere. In Venice, the canals are the streets, and the fundamental geometry of the city is a direct response to the aquatic environment. The decisions about where to place a bridge, how to manage tidal flow, and how to provide freshwater via cisterns were matters of existential importance. The layout of Venice, for all its uniqueness, demonstrates the ultimate expression of hydraulic engineering as the primary dictator of urban form. For a more terrestrial case study, we can look to the vibrant city of Toulouse in southern France. Nicknamed La Ville Rose for its distinctive pink brick, Toulouse's medieval growth was inextricably linked to the Garonne River. The city's economy thrived on river trade, particularly the export of the blue dye derived from the woad plant. Consequently, the most important streets in the old town don't radiate from a castle or a cathedral, but instead run like arteries directly down to the river's edge. These streets were designed for one primary purpose: to move goods from riverboats to warehouses and market stalls as efficiently as possible. The width and gradient of these key routes were optimized for carts heavily laden with barrels and bales, a clear example of how commerce, powered by water, carved its signature into the city's stone. This deep, integrated medieval relationship with water stands in stark contrast to the modern approach, where water is often treated as a nuisance to be quickly piped underground and out of sight. As we face escalating climate challenges, more intense storms, devastating floods, and prolonged droughts, the medieval philosophy offers a powerful lesson. They viewed water as a resource to be managed within the daily life of the city, not hidden from it. Their street geometry worked with the natural watershed, not against it. Instead of channelizing rivers in concrete culverts, perhaps we can rediscover the value of daylighting streams and creating green swales that manage stormwater while adding beauty and biodiversity to our urban landscapes. The medieval model teaches us that resilience isn't about dominating nature with brute force engineering, but about designing our communities to adapt and flow with the natural forces that have always and will always shape our world. This practical, life-giving collaboration with water seamlessly introduces another layer of meaning found in the powerful thresholds that defined and protected the urban identity itself. Stand before the massive, iron-reinforced gates of a city like Avila, Spain. These are not mere openings in a wall, they are profound statements in stone, the carefully crafted frontispiece to an entire urban world. To pass through was to undergo a transformation, to leave the unpredictable wilderness of the outside and enter a realm of law, community, and divine protection. The very placement of these gates was the first stroke of the urban planner's pen, dictating the entire geometry of the streets within. From each gate, the main thoroughfares would radiate inward, like arteries carrying the lifeblood of trade, pilgrims, and ideas directly into the heart of the city. This wasn't just about traffic flow, it was a powerful geometric expression of inclusion and exclusion, defining who and what belonged. Anthropologist Mary Douglas perfectly captures the profound weight of these structures, noting that thresholds are powerful symbols of liminality and control. They were the ultimate liminal spaces, the physical embodiment of a boundary between the known and the unknown, the safe and the threatening. This symbolic power was expressed through meticulous architectural design. The alignment of a city's main gate with its primary street created a powerful axis of symmetry, a deliberate sightline that communicated order and control to anyone approaching. Walking through that gate, a visitor's gaze would be funneled directly down that central avenue, often toward the commanding presence of a cathedral or town hall. This was a psychological masterstroke, immediately establishing the authority and organizational logic of the urban core. Furthermore, the number and placement of gates were never arbitrary. A city might have multiple gates, each serving a specific symbolic and economic purpose. One gate might face the nearest river port, another the road to an important pilgrimage site, and a third the lands of a rival lord, each one tailoring its defensive posture and ceremonial function to its specific external relationship. The passage through the gate itself was often ritualized. Guards collected tolls not just as a tax, but as a rite of passage granting entry. Travelers might be required to state their business, and certain individuals or goods could be denied entry, reinforcing the gate's role as a filter for the community's body and soul. The design of the gate complex was a masterpiece of layered meaning and function. The towering gatehouses, like those still standing in Nuremberg, Germany, were not just for show. They served as elevated platforms for constant surveillance, allowing watchmen to spot friend or foe from miles away. Their sheer height was a symbol of the town's vigilance and strength, a warning to any who might threaten the peace within. But the symbolism often ran deeper than mere defense. Many gates were adorned with elaborate religious iconography, carvings of the town's patron saint, scenes of the Last Judgment, or protective symbols like the Eye of God. This transformed the act of passing through into a spiritual event, a blessing or a warning that one was now entering sacred ground under divine watch. The gate was not just protecting bodies and goods, it was protecting the very soul of the community from external corruption and sin. For a perfect example of strategic placement, look to the double gates of Carcassonne. The approach to the city was designed as a deadly funnel, forcing attackers to expose their unshielded sides to the defenders on the walls before even reaching the first gate. If they managed to breach that outer door, they would find themselves trapped in a narrow killing court, surrounded by towers and murder holes, with a second, even stronger gate still barring their way. Here, geometry and masonry combined to create a threshold that was as psychologically daunting as it was physically impregnable. This historical view of the city gate as a powerful, multi-layered threshold forces a fascinating comparison with our modern world. While we have largely dismantled our physical walls, have we abandoned the concept of the symbolic gateway? Not at all. Its function has simply evolved. Consider the modern highway interchange on the edge of a major city. This sprawling concrete labyrinth is the contemporary equivalent of the medieval gate complex. It is a controlled point of entry that filters and directs the flow of people and goods, its design signaling the transition from the open road to the structured order of the urban grid. The toll booth serves the same function as the medieval guard collecting a tariff for passage. The bright, towering signage of commercial strips and corporate parks that often cluster around these interchanges act as modern-day heraldic symbols, announcing the economic character and identity of the city you are about to enter. These are our new symbolic thresholds, perhaps less romantic than the gates of a villa, but no less powerful in defining the transition into a controlled and ordered urban space. But for all the grand designs imposed by kings, bishops, and military engineers, a different kind of urban genius was quietly at work across the medieval world. one that emerged not from a single master plan, but from the accumulated, incremental decisions of countless ordinary people over generations. This is the story of organic growth, where the geometry of a street wasn't drawn on parchment but was worn into the earth by countless footsteps, a testament to the collective intelligence of a community solving problems day by day. Imagine the London of the 1300s, a teeming, vibrant, and chaotic warren of lanes before the Great Fire would later sweep it away. Here, there was no grand designer dictating a perfect grid. Instead, the city's form unfolded like a living language, a path worn by farmers driving their sheep to market would, over decades, become a lane. That lane would then be defined by the placement of a tavern on one side and a blacksmith's forge on the other. The boundaries between private properties, the back edges of gardens, the walls of barns would eventually become the invisible guidelines for new alleyways. This was geometry emerging from the bottom up, a physical record of daily life and necessity. As the geographer Michael Kunzen astutely observed, organic growth often produced highly efficient, human-scaled environments. These spaces might have lacked the imposing order of a radial plan, but they possessed a different kind of logic, one of intimate practicality and deeply ingrained community knowledge. This process of urban accretion followed several beautiful, unwritten rules. The most fundamental was the power of the desire path. Before any council could decree a road's route, people and animals would naturally find the most efficient way to get from a water source to a high point, or from a cluster of homes to a common field. These informal trails, etched into the landscape by countless feet, became the undeniable blueprint for future streets. They represented the optimal path of least resistance, and to pave over such a trail was simply to formalize what everyone already knew to be true. Equally important was the role of property division. When a large plot of land was inherited by multiple children, it would be subdivided into long, narrow strips. The boundaries between these strips, often just a ditch or a hedge, would over time become the rights of way for new lanes, giving rise to the characteristic narrow, winding passages that define so many ancient villages. This was not a chaotic free-for-all, it was a slow, negotiated process. The community itself acted as the planner, with neighbors making informal agreements about access, drainage, and the placement of new structures. A homeowner might agree to set their new house back a few feet to allow a cart to pass, subtly widening a lane. A group of families might collectively maintain a shared well at a crossroads, cementing that location as a vital node in the neighborhood. This was urban form created through a million tiny acts of collaboration and compromise. The results of this organic process were environments of remarkable adaptability and charm. Unlike a rigid grid which can struggle to accommodate unexpected change, these informally grown towns could evolve and mutate with incredible flexibility. A new industry like a dye works could set up on the edge of town, and the lanes would simply grow out to meet it, following the new patterns of traffic it generated. There's also an undeniable aesthetic magic to these spaces. The crooked, uneven lines, the sudden openings into small squares, the way buildings lean in to create a sense of intimacy and enclosure, these aren't flaws but features. They create a sense of discovery and surprise around every corner, a human scale that feels comforting and engaging. For a perfect example, one need only visit the village of Castle-Comer in the English Cotswolds. Its streets appear to be a random tangle flowing around ancient cottages and following the curves of a small river, but a closer look reveals a profound logic. The main lane follows the most level ground along the valley floor, while smaller paths branch off steeply uphill to reach outlying farms and fields. Every twist and turn is a direct response to the landscape and the centuries-old patterns of life that once animated it. A more complex case study can be found in the heart of Siena, Italy, with its famous contrada or city districts. While the main civic squares like the Piazza del Campo are masterpieces of deliberate design, the warren of streets within each contrada tells a different story. These neighborhoods grew organically over centuries, each developing its own unique identity and, consequently, its own subtle geometric character. The boundaries between them are not straight lines drawn by a surveyor, but are often formed by the irregular meeting of these organically grown street networks. The result is a breathtaking urban fabric that blends magnificent planned spaces with intensely personal, community-grown lanes, a physical manifestation of the tension between civic order and neighborhood identity. This rich history of informal, bottom-up planning poses a critical question for our modern world, dominated by top-down zoning codes and large-scale development. In our quest for efficiency and order, have we sacrificed the flexibility, the human scale, and the sheer charm that emerges from organic growth? Can we design processes that allow for a similar kind of incremental, community-driven development? Perhaps it means creating looser zoning that allows for mixed uses and gradual change, or designing new neighborhoods with a basic framework but leaving room for residents to personalize their streets and shared spaces over time. The medieval model shows us that the most loved and livable places are not always the most perfectly planned, but are often those that have been shaped, little by little, by the people who call them home. Picture the smoldering aftermath of a medieval town struck by disaster. In Rennes, France, in the year 1720, a catastrophic fire swept through the densely packed wooden buildings, leaving a landscape of ash and despair. Yet from this devastation emerged a profound opportunity. The very ruins became the blueprint for a new urban vision, one where wider, straighter streets were carved through the charred remains, not for grandeur, but as vital fire breaks to prevent such a tragedy from ever consuming the city again. This reactive transformation reveals a crucial truth about medieval urban life. Sometimes, the most powerful design innovations were born not from careful planning, but from absolute necessity in the face of catastrophe. As historian Samuel Cohn reminds us, disasters were catalysts for urban innovation. These crises, whether fire, plague, or war, acted as brutal but effective forces that shattered old patterns and compelled communities to rethink their relationship with the very ground beneath their feet, leading to street geometries explicitly designed for resilience and survival. The relentless threat of fire was perhaps the most common driver of these geometric changes. In a world built largely of timber, thatch, and open hearths, a single spark could erase a neighborhood in hours. The medieval response was not just to rebuild, but to rebuild smarter. Following a major blaze, town councils often enacted pioneering building regulations that directly dictated street form. They mandated wider thoroughfares to act as fire breaks, hoping a broad lane of cobblestone could halt the leap of flames. They sometimes required new buildings to be constructed of brick or stone on their street-facing sides, and gradually banned thatched roofs in urban centers. This often led to a fascinating patchwork of geometries within a single city. You might find a newer, wider street cutting a straight path through a district, its modern regularity a stark, purposeful contrast to the ancient, organic warren of lanes that somehow survived the flames just a block away. The rubble from collapsed buildings was rarely wasted. It was often used to regrade streets, subtly altering their camber to improve drainage or fill in dangerous dips, turning the debris of disaster into the foundation for a safer future. The horror of the bubonic plague, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, prompted a different kind of geometric rethinking, one based on a flawed but powerful theory of disease. Medieval physicians believed that plague was spread by miasma-corrupted, foul air that hung stagnant in crowded, narrow streets. In the aftermath of the pandemic, which killed a staggering proportion of the urban population, there was a concerted effort to literally air out the city. Authorities advocated for widening streets to allow fresh winds to blow through and dispel these deadly vapors. This public health initiative, born of tragedy, led to the deliberate demolition of buildings to create broader avenues and more open public squares. The goal was to improve circulation, both of people and of air, with the hope that sunlight and breeze could cleanse the urban environment. This represents an early, poignant attempt at sanitary urban planning, where the geometry of a street was directly linked to the health of its inhabitants. While their understanding of germ theory was centuries away, their observation that less congested areas often fared better led them to a correct, if accidentally, conclusion that more open spaces could contribute to public well-being. Warfare, with its sieges and sackings, was another brutal architect. When town walls were breached by emerging gunpowder artillery or undermined by sappers, the resulting damage often necessitated not just repair, but complete reconfiguration. A neighborhood shattered by cannon fire might be cleared entirely rather than rebuilt, its stones repurposed to create thicker, lower, angled bastions designed to deflect the new artillery. This could dramatically alter the street network inside the walls, as old routes that once led to a now obsolete section of the fortification were closed off or rerouted. In some cases, entire towns were relocated to more defensible positions after being razed, their new street plans reflecting the latest military geometry from the very first foundation stone. A powerful example of post-disaster rebuilding, albeit at the very end of the medieval period, can be found in Lisbon, Portugal. After a devastating earthquake in 1531, the city was rebuilt with a renewed focus on accessibility and open space, with straighter, wider streets that drew on both medieval principles of order and a dawning Renaissance emphasis on classical proportion, all in the name of creating a city that could better withstand future tremors and the fires they inevitably sparked. The most famous case study of all, the Great Fire of London in 1666, is technically a post-medieval event, but its response was deeply rooted in the medieval mindset of learning from catastrophe. While Sir Christopher Wren's grand vision of a new London of sweeping boulevards and radial avenues was ultimately too ambitious and expensive to implement fully, the rebuilding that did occur was governed by the groundbreaking Rebuilding of London Act of 1667. This legislation was a masterpiece of proactive regulation born from reactive disaster. It officially banned overhanging jetties, mandated brick or stone construction, standardized the thickness of walls, and set minimum widths for different classes of streets. These rules effectively standardized the city's geometry for safety and efficiency, creating a more regular, navigable, and fire-resistant street network. Though the medieval core was gone, the spirit of adaptive urbanism, of using a crisis to impose order and prevent future calamity, was a direct continuation of a centuries-old practice. This long history of urban adaptation forces a critical question for our own time. In an era of climate change, rising sea levels, and increasingly frequent natural disasters, how do our contemporary cities learn from the past? The medieval model teaches us that resilience is not about building impregnable fortresses, but about fostering adaptability. It's about having the courage, after a disaster, to not simply rebuild what was there, but to rebuild smarter. It means considering retreat from vulnerable coastlines, creating green spaces that can absorb floodwaters, and designing infrastructure that can fail gracefully rather than catastrophically. Just as medieval planners widened streets for airflow, we might redesign our cities to mitigate heat islands and improve air quality. The lesson isn't in the specific solutions of the past, but in the mindset, to see a disaster not just as an ending, but as a painful yet powerful opportunity to reshape our environment for the greater safety and health of generations to come. Now, let's turn our gaze from the streets themselves to the maps that tried to capture them. Imagine unrolling the vast, intricate parchment of the Hereford Mappa Mundi, created around the year 1300. Jerusalem sits at the center of the world, a perfect circle, while other cities are rendered not as realistic landscapes, but as stylized walled circles or castles, their internal streets often simplified into a symbolic cross. To our modern eyes, trained on satellite imagery and precise scale, this might look naive or fanciful, but we would be missing the point entirely, as the esteemed cartographer P. D. A. Harvey guides our understanding. Medieval maps were as much about belief as geography. This wasn't an attempt to create a GPS guide for travelers. It was a spiritual and ideological diagram of the world, a visual sermon that placed human history within a divine framework. The geometry used, the perfect circles, the central placement, the cruciform street patterns, wasn't about accuracy, but about representing an ideal heavenly order imposed upon the messy reality of the earthly realm. The map tells us less about the actual winding alleyways of a town, and more about the medieval mind's desire to see harmony, symmetry, and sacred meaning in the structure of human habitation. Yet, not all medieval maps were purely symbolic. A different, more practical cartographic tradition flourished alongside the spiritual one, particularly in the bustling, commercially minded city-states of Italy. In places like Florence and Siena, we find detailed town plans that, while still not perfectly to scale, demonstrate a keen awareness of geometric principles and a clear intent to document the urban fabric for administrative purposes. These maps were tools of power and pragmatism. They show a clear understanding of the street network as a system recording the main piazzas, the gates, the major arteries, and the relationship between key buildings. The illustrators often used a kind of oblique projection, drawing the buildings as if seen from an angle but arranging them to show their position relative to the street, creating a fascinating hybrid view that was both diagrammatic and representational. The very act of creating such a map required a geometric mindset, an ability to abstract the city's form and translate its complexities onto a two-dimensional surface. This suggests that the planners and leaders of these cities were thinking geometrically, even if their primary goal was defense or commerce rather than perfect geometric beauty. They understood the city as a comprehensible, interconnected whole, a physical entity that could be measured, managed, and modified. This practical application of maps extended directly into the machinery of the state. Detailed urban maps became indispensable tools for tax collection. By accurately depicting property boundaries and the frontage of buildings along a street, authorities could calculate and levy taxes with far greater efficiency than from a simple written list. The map itself became a legal document, a permanent record of who owned what and what they owed. Furthermore, these maps were likely used for planning and engineering projects. If a new wall was to be built, or a canal dug, or a market square expanded, a map provided the overview necessary to understand how the change would impact the existing street network and property lines. They allowed rulers and engineers to visualize the city as a geometric puzzle, where adding or moving one piece would inevitably affect the configuration of all the others. In this sense, the map was not just a record of the city's geometry, it was an active instrument in its ongoing geometric evolution. The symbolic power of these lines on parchment was also profound. Drawing a street on a map was an act of defining it, of giving it an official identity and cementing its importance within the hierarchy of the city's routes. The thick, bold lines representing main thoroughfares were literal lines of power, charting the flow of goods, soldiers, and authority. Their depiction on a map reinforced their status, just as the fainter, narrower lines for alleyways confirmed their secondary, local importance. For a stunning example of this blend of symbolic and realistic depiction, we can look to the Nuremberg Chronicle, published in 1493. This famous history of the world included panoramic views of countless cities. Some, like Jerusalem, are shown as idealized symbolic circles, but others, like Nuremberg itself, are rendered with surprising topographic accuracy. The artist captures the bend of the river Pegnitz, the placement of the major churches, and the distinctive pattern of the main streets, all framed within the city's iconic walls. It is both a portrait of a real place and a symbolic representation of urban order and civic pride. The most accurate and technically advanced maps of the period, however, were the Portolan charts used by Mediterranean sailors. These navigational maps, with their web of room lines radiating from compass roses, are breathtakingly precise in their depiction of coastlines. But when they illustrate a coastal city, they often zoom into a level of detail that reveals the actual, organic street geometry. A Portolan chart might show the dense, tangled network of lanes in a city like Genoa or Barcelona, capturing the unique fingerprint of its unplanned, adaptive growth. This provides us with invaluable evidence that mapmakers were perfectly capable of rendering complex, non-geometric street patterns when their purpose required it, in this case, to help a sailor identify a port city from its unique urban silhouette as seen from the deck of a ship. This journey through medieval mapping forces a fascinating reflection on our own time. Today, we navigate our world through the sterile, hyper-accurate geometry of digital maps on our phones. These tools are miracles of precision, but they also fundamentally shape our perception. We see the city as a top-down, optimized network of routes for getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. The algorithm calculates the most efficient path, flattening the rich, three-dimensional, human-scaled experience of a street into a simple line on a screen. The medieval map, for all its symbolic distortion or lack of scale, often captured the experience and meaning of a place more effectively than our GPS ever can. It asked not what is the fastest way, but what is the most important place? And how does this city connect to the cosmos? Our modern mapping technology grants us incredible efficiency, but perhaps we have lost a layer of understanding. The ability to see the symbolic power, the historical layers, and the communal identity that are also etched into the geometry of our streets, invisible to the satellite but vital to the human spirit. Yet the most profound legacy of medieval street geometry isn't found in any single feature, but in an entire philosophy of urban living that modern planners are now desperately trying to recapture. This brings us to the powerful insights of Jane Jacobs, who observed that old ideas about urban form persist because they work. She wasn't just talking about bricks and mortar, she was championing the inherent wisdom of human-scaled, community-oriented design that medieval towns perfected by necessity. The narrow, winding lanes that once slowed invaders now provide the very template for the walkable city movement. Their intimate scale naturally calms traffic, encourages pedestrian activity, and fosters the kind of casual street-level interactions that create vibrant, safe neighborhoods. This isn't a nostalgic aesthetic choice. It's a rediscovery of psychological and social truths about how humans thrive in built environments. The constant eyes on the street that Jacobs celebrated where residents naturally watch over public space from their windows and doorsteps, was the default state of a medieval street, where buildings leaned in close and every passerby was a neighbor. Modern suburbs, with their wide, empty streets and garage door facades, often lack this natural surveillance and community connection, leading planners to look backward to move forward. This medieval wisdom extends powerfully into the realm of sustainability and environmental design. Long before the term passive solar was coined, medieval builders were masters of it. In sun-drenched regions like Italy and Spain, the orientation of streets was often carefully considered to maximize shade during the hottest parts of the day. The narrow, canyon-like streets created their own microclimates, with high buildings providing cooling shadow and thermal mass in the stone walls helping to regulate temperature. In colder northern climates, streets might be aligned to capture precious sunlight for warmth and illumination. This deep understanding of working with the local climate, rather than overpowering it with energy-intensive technology, offers a crucial lesson for contemporary architecture facing the challenges of climate change. We're now reintegrating these passive strategies, designing buildings and street layouts that use natural ventilation and solar orientation to drastically reduce energy consumption, proving that the old ways can be the most advanced. Perhaps the most visible modern movement embracing these principles is new urbanism. This isn't simply a style that mimics old buildings. It's a comprehensive approach to planning that consciously revives medieval patterns for the 21st century. Visit a community like Seaside in Florida or Poundbury in England, and you'll see the DNA of the medieval town immediately. There are no sprawling, isolating suburbs here. Instead, you find a return to mixed-use zones where homes, shops, workplaces, and schools are interwoven within easy walking distance. The street network prioritizes pedestrians and cyclists over cars, often using the very same tricks medieval planners did: curves, corners, and varied widths to naturally slow traffic and create a human-paced environment. Public squares serve as the heart of the community, just like the medieval marketplace, functioning as spaces for social gathering, farmers' markets, and civic events. This is a direct rejection of the 20th century model of rigid, single-use zoning that segregated life into disconnected pods, forcing a dependency on cars and eroding community bonds. The new urbanist argument is that we became less healthy, less connected, and less happy when we abandoned the time-tested geometry of traditional towns. We can also see this living legacy not in new towns, but in the vibrant hearts of ancient ones. Consider Edinburgh, Scotland, where the medieval Old Town and the Georgian New Town exist in a stunning contrast that highlights enduring principles. The Old Town, with its famous Royal Mile running along a volcanic ridge and its narrow, precipitous closes branching off like ribs, is a textbook example of organic, terrain-hugging medieval planning. It's a dense, walkable, and intensely human environment that remains one of the city's biggest tourist attractions and most desirable places to live. Just a short walk away, the new town represents the 18th century Enlightenment ideal, a formal, symmetrical grid of wide streets and elegant squares. Yet, despite their different aesthetics, both districts share a crucial medieval inheritance: a clear definition of public and private space, a walkable scale, and a mixed-use character that keeps the streets active at all hours. The city has wisely preserved both, understanding that this geometric diversity is key to its charm and functionality. Edinburgh demonstrates that the medieval legacy isn't about freezing a city in the past, but about intelligently adapting its most successful patterns for modern life. This brings us to a pivotal question for our future. As we face unprecedented urban growth and environmental challenges, which medieval principles should we consciously choose to embrace? The answer lies not in recreating a romanticized past, but in extracting the timeless wisdom embedded in those ancient streets. We should embrace the principle of adaptability, designing spaces that can evolve over time to meet changing needs, rather than remaining rigid and obsolete. We should champion the idea of the city as a collection of distinct, walkable neighborhoods, each with its own center and identity, reducing the need for long commutes and fostering local community. We must reintegrate nature into the urban fabric, not as an afterthought but as a central planning partner, using green spaces for climate resilience and human well-being, just as medieval towns used their fields and rivers. And perhaps most importantly, we should remember that successful urban geometry has always served the human spirit, creating not just efficient pathways, but meaningful places that tell a story, foster connection, and inspire a sense of belonging. The greatest lesson from the medieval street is that the most enduring design is that which understands people first and builds the world around them accordingly. It's a wonderfully romantic idea, isn't it? The notion that every single twisting, turning lane in a medieval city was a carefully laid trap, a deliberate maze designed to baffle and ensnare any invading army that dared to enter. This image of universal defensive cunning is perhaps the most persistent myth surrounding medieval street geometry. While it's true that many towns employed these tactics, the reality is far more nuanced and infinitely more interesting. The truth is, a great many of those charming, crooked streets were not built to confuse outsiders, but for reasons that were profoundly practical, economic, or simply emergent from centuries of unplanned growth. As archaeologist Glyn Kopak wisely cautions us, we must avoid projecting modern fantasies onto the past. We see mystery and intentional mystery where medieval people saw solutions to drainage problems, the legacy of old property boundaries, or the most efficient path to the well. Let's unravel a few of these enduring myths, starting with the assumption that every curve has a defensive purpose. While we've explored the brilliant strategic use of chicanes and blind corners in places like Carcassonne, this was not a universal blueprint. In countless towns, curves were simply the path of least resistance. A street might bend to avoid a massive, ancient tree that was too difficult to cut down, to follow the natural contour of a hill to make the gradient more manageable for carts, or to skirt around a large rock outcrop. In coastal or riverside towns, the streets often curved to mirror the shoreline, providing access to docks and wharves. In these instances, the geometry is a dialogue with the landscape, not a military diagram. Furthermore, the idea of the omnipresence of sacred geometry, while compelling, is often overstated. While alignments with solstice sunrises or processional routes to cathedrals are documented in specific, often major, religious centers, they were not the driving force behind every street in every town. For the average burgher in a small market town, the primary concern was getting his cartload of goods to the square without getting stuck in the mud, not ensuring his front door was aligned with the constellation of Orion. Another pervasive myth is the binary choice between total planning and pure chaos. We often imagine medieval towns as either perfectly planned grids like a bastide or hopelessly chaotic tangles of alleys. The reality for most cities is a fascinating hybrid. A town might have a planned core, a main market square with a few straight streets laid out by a local lord, while the surrounding neighborhoods grew organically over generations. Archaeological excavations frequently reveal this layered history. Digging beneath a seemingly random lane, archaeologists might find evidence of an older, straight Roman road that later buildings gradually encroached upon, or the foundations of a long-vanished wooden fence line that became the guideline for a future stone street. These findings point to a world of practical priorities, where the daily needs of access, property division, and infrastructure slowly but surely shaped the urban fabric, creating a geometry of lived experience rather than grand design. Nowhere are these myths more clearly illustrated than in the case of Venice. It's the quintessential example of a labyrinthine medieval city, a place where it's famously easy to get lost. The popular imagination attributes this to a deliberate design to confuse invaders or perhaps even to create a city-wide spiritual labyrinth. The truth is both more mundane and more remarkable. Venice's street pattern is not a maze, it is a direct and logical consequence of its unique foundation. The city was built on a cluster of over 100 small islands in a lagoon. The first settlers didn't design streets at all. They built houses on the firmest ground they could find on each island. The gaps between these houses on the same island became calli, the narrow pedestrian lanes. The gaps between the islands became the canals. The city's famous complexity arises from the sheer number of these islands and the organic way they were eventually connected by a web of small bridges. The geometry is essentially a fossilized map of the original archipelago. There was no master plan to create a maze. The maze is simply the negative space left by the islands themselves. The Romantic myth obscures the true genius of Venice, which is its breathtaking adaptation to a challenging aquatic environment. This process of demystification is not just an academic exercise. It has profound implications for how we preserve and interact with these historic spaces today. When we romanticize a street as being defensive or sacred, we risk freezing it in a fictional past, potentially prioritizing a myth over the authentic, layered history that actually exists. Preservation efforts must be guided by evidence, not legend. Understanding that a lane is crooked because it followed an old stream bed, not because a medieval engineer wanted to trap Vikings, allows us to appreciate a different, equally valid story of adaptation and survival. It connects us to the real people who built and walked these streets, people who are solving everyday problems of transportation, water, and community. By clearing away the fog of fantasy, we don't diminish these places. We honor their true, complex, and deeply human history, which is far more fascinating than any simple myth could ever be. So you're standing in the middle of Rothenburg ob der Tauber, Germany, surrounded by half-timbered houses and cobblestone lanes that seem to curve in every direction. It's easy to simply appreciate the charm, but what if you could unlock the hidden language of these streets? The first thing to do is find a high point. Climb the town hall tower or walk the intact city walls. From this vantage, the pattern reveals itself. Notice how the main streets radiate from the central market square like spokes on a wheel, a classic feature of towns that grew around a central power and marketplace. Now look for the tighter, more irregular knots of lanes. These often mark the oldest parts of town, where growth was organic and unplanned, following ancient property lines and footpaths long before a central authority imposed order. As you descend back to street level, your walk becomes a detective game. Start with the gates. In a walled city like Dubrovnik, the placement of the pile gate or the ploch gate isn't random. The main street, the Stradon, runs straight as an arrow between them, a deliberate axis designed for processions and moving goods efficiently from the port to the heart of the city. Now feel the width of the street under your feet. Is it broad and straight like the Stradon? This was likely a major ceremonial or commercial route. Does it suddenly narrow into a tight, crooked alley, perhaps with a sharp 90-degree bend? You might be standing in a defensive chicane, a deliberate bottleneck designed to break up the momentum of a charging enemy force. Run your hand along the walls. A change in masonry from large, rough-hewn stones at the base to smaller, more regular bricks higher up can tell a story of destruction and rebuilding, of a town that raised its walls to meet new threats. Timing your visit can reveal another layer of meaning. If you can, visit a medieval town like Tallinn during a solstice or equinox. Position yourself on a main street leading to a church, like the one stretching from the city gate towards St. Olaf's Church. Watch where the sun rises or sets. There's a chance you'll witness a deliberate alignment, a celestial event engineered by planners who saw the city as a mirror of the heavens. This wasn't just astronomy, it was a way of grounding faith in the very fabric of daily life, a reminder of divine order with every sunrise. To separate original medieval work from later alterations, look down. Original cobblestones are often large, uneven, and worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Modern repairs will be smaller, more uniform, and sharper edged. Look up at the roof lines. Original medieval buildings often lean inward, their timber frames sagging with age, while carefully restored sections will stand perfectly straight. Arm yourself with digital tools to see through time. Smartphone apps now overlay historical maps onto modern street views. Standing on a wide boulevard in Paris, you can use an app to see the faint ghost of a medieval wall that once ran directly beneath your feet, explaining the sudden curve of a building facade that otherwise makes no sense. In York, such an app can show you how the modern street pattern of the shambles still perfectly follows the lines of the ancient Roman road beneath it, 1,000 years of history compressed into a single glance. The key is to be curious. Why does this lane suddenly dogleg? It might be avoiding the long-vanished garden wall of a monastery. Why is this particular square so wide and open? It was probably designed as a market and gathering place, but also as a firebreak after a previous blaze consumed the tighter wooden buildings that once stood there. Every curve, every width, every choice of stone is a sentence in a story waiting to be read. But preserving these ancient street patterns is far from a simple task of locking them away in a museum case. The very towns that have successfully safeguarded their medieval geometry for centuries now find themselves on the front lines of a new kind of battle, one that pits the relentless pressures of the modern world against the fragile authenticity of the past. Imagine the daily scene in a place like Bruges, where the same narrow, cobbled lanes that once echoed with the clatter of horse-drawn carts are now choked with delivery vans and a constant stream of tourist buses. The gentle camber of the street, so carefully calculated for medieval drainage, is now being worn down and cracked by the weight and vibration of modern heavy vehicles. This creates an intense and constant tension between preserving the historic fabric and meeting the practical needs of the people who live and work within it every single day. As UNESCO officials so aptly frame the challenge, preservation is not about freezing time, but managing change respectfully. This isn't about creating a sterile historical diorama. It's about guiding a living, breathing community through the 21st century without allowing its unique character to be erased in the process. The dilemmas facing conservationists are both ethical and intensely practical, often involving difficult trade-offs with no perfect solution. One of the most pressing issues is the need to upgrade essential 20th and 21st century infrastructure, water mains, fiber optic cables, electrical conduits beneath streets that were never designed to accommodate them. Digging up centuries-old cobblestones to lay new pipes can permanently alter the street's subtle gradient and drainage patterns, and finding the right materials to patch the excavation in a way that is both functional and visually sympathetic is a constant challenge. Then there is the colossal impact of mass tourism. While tourism provides the economic lifeblood for maintaining these historic sites, the sheer volume of foot traffic causes immense physical wear and tear on soft stone pavements and ancient building foundations. More insidiously, the demand for tourist amenities, large hotels, sprawling restaurants, and generic souvenir shops can slowly homogenize a historic district, pushing out traditional artisans and local residents and turning a vibrant community into a themed backdrop, a process often called museumification. Perhaps the most existential threat of all comes from climate change. Medieval towns were brilliantly adapted to the climate of their time, but they are now facing conditions their builders could never have anticipated. Increased frequency of heavy rainfall can overwhelm the ancient drainage systems, leading to damaging floods that undermine building foundations. Rising sea levels threaten coastal gems like Venice and Dubrovnik in an obvious way, but even inland towns built on rivers like Prague or York face a heightened risk of catastrophic flooding that could wash away irreplaceable history in a single event. Adapting to these new realities often requires interventions that can clash with preservation goals. Installing modern flood barriers or water pumps might be essential for survival, but finding a way to integrate this new hardware without visually destroying the very atmosphere you're trying to protect is a monumental design and philosophical challenge. Yet there are beacons of hope and innovation showing that this balance can be struck. The city of Ghent in Belgium offers a powerful success story. In the 1990s, the city center was plagued by traffic congestion and pollution that was degrading the medieval environment. The city council made the bold decision to implement a large car-free zone, not just a single street but an entire network of historic lanes and squares. While controversial at first, the move has been transformative. It dramatically reduced air and noise pollution, halted the physical vibration damage to buildings from traffic, and returned the public space to pedestrians and cyclists, fundamentally improving the quality of life for residents. The geometry of the streets was no longer a constraint to be navigated by vehicles, but was allowed to function as it was originally intended, as a human-scaled network for walking, gathering, and commerce. This proactive approach protected the historic fabric while making the city more livable and sustainable for the future. Conversely, there are cautionary tales where a failure to manage change respectfully has led to irreversible loss. In the mid-20th century, many European cities, eager to embrace modernity and the automobile, chose to bulldoze entire medieval quarters to make way for wide boulevards and multi-lane ring roads. The historic core of cities like Frankfurt and Birmingham was largely sacrificed for the sake of traffic flow, severing the organic street patterns and erasing centuries of layered history in the process. These decisions, often regretted within a few decades, created soulless urban spaces and demonstrated the profound cultural cost of prioritizing efficiency over identity. Today, the debates are more nuanced but no less heated. In the ancient city of York, a perpetual conflict plays out between accessibility and authenticity. Proposals to reroute traffic or restrict certain vehicles are met with concerns from local businesses about losing customers. Discussions about using different, more durable materials to repair the famous shambles are weighed against the need to maintain its visual and historical integrity. Every decision is a community-wide conversation about what matters most. This ongoing global struggle forces a critical question that extends far beyond any single town. How do we, as a global society, become better stewards of these irreplaceable geometric treasures? The answer likely lies in a shift from pure preservation to active, intelligent adaptation. It means embracing new technologies, like using ground-penetrating radar to map underground utilities without disruptive digging, or developing advanced mortars and stone treatments that can protect ancient surfaces from modern pollution without altering their appearance. It requires managing tourism not through unlimited growth, but through smart policies that spread visitors throughout the year and encourage deeper engagement with the culture rather than superficial consumption of the scenery. Most importantly, it demands that local communities are placed at the very heart of the decision-making process. When residents have a genuine stake in the future of their historic environment, they become its most passionate and effective defenders, ensuring that these living museums continue to tell their stories for generations to come. There's a profound and often overlooked dimension to these ancient streets, one that operates not on a strategic or symbolic level, but on a deeply personal, psychological one. It's the simple, almost primal feeling of comfort you get when walking down a narrow, gently curving medieval lane. The high walls on either side create a sense of enclosure and protection, like a sheltered pathway that invites you to slow down, to explore, to feel connected to your immediate surroundings. Now contrast that with the experience of a wide, straight modern boulevard. The exposure can feel exhilarating for a driver, but for a pedestrian, it's often an environment of sensory overload and psychological distance, a space you move through quickly rather than a place you actually inhabit. This stark difference isn't just aesthetic, it's a fundamental lesson in environmental psychology, a field that confirms what medieval builders seemed to understand intuitively, that the shape of our streets directly shapes our emotions, our behavior, and our overall well-being. The pioneering work of environmental psychologists like Jan Gehl gives us the language to understand this phenomenon. His research consistently shows that human-scale geometry fosters community and reduces stress. Human scale is the key idea here. It refers to an environment built to the proportions and pace of a person walking, not a vehicle moving at speed. A medieval street with its narrow width, its irregular building facades, and its lack of long, uninterrupted sightlines is the ultimate human-scaled environment. This design naturally encourages a slower, more mindful pace. You're compelled to pay attention to the details, the texture of the stone, the shape of a doorway, the sound of your own footsteps. This slower pace reduces the cortisol levels associated with the frantic rush of modern life and creates the perfect conditions for spontaneous social interaction. It's easy to stop and chat with a neighbor when the street is only wide enough for a few people. It feels natural to pause and look in a shop window. These micro-interactions are the building blocks of community, the glue that turns a collection of houses into a neighborhood. A wide, barren avenue, by contrast, discourages stopping. It emphasizes rapid transit and creates a psychological barrier between people on opposite sides of the street, isolating individuals even in a crowd. This psychological impact extends to the element of surprise and engagement created by curves and irregular angles. A straight street reveals everything to you at once. There are no secrets, no discoveries to be made, but a medieval lane with its gentle bends and unexpected openings is a narrative in physical form. You are constantly wondering what lies around the next corner. Will it be a small courtyard with a fountain, a glimpse of a church spire, a tiny bakery? This element of mystery is cognitively engaging. It creates a sense of anticipation and gentle excitement, turning a simple walk into a journey of discovery. This active engagement with our environment is mentally stimulating and restorative, a welcome contrast to the passive, often monotonous experience of navigating many modern planned spaces. Furthermore, there's a powerful symbolic reassurance in the ordered, albeit complex, layouts of these old towns. While they may seem confusing at first, they are built on a logic of local connectivity rather than through traffic. This creates a defined, knowable world. You might get temporarily lost, but you are never truly disoriented because you are always within a bounded, comprehensible system of lanes and squares. This provides a subconscious sense of security and belonging, a feeling of being in a place that has a clear identity and boundaries, which is a cornerstone of psychological well-being. We can even see the impact of these designs in concrete studies on wayfinding and safety. Research comparing wayfinding in medieval-style districts versus modern grid plans often finds that while people initially learn to navigate grids faster, they form stronger and more affectionate cognitive maps of the more complex, irregular medieval areas. The unique landmarks and distinctive character of each turn create stronger mental anchors, making the space more memorable and personally meaningful. There's also compelling evidence, supported by the principles of crime prevention through environmental design, that the very features of medieval streets contribute to natural surveillance and lower crime rates. The narrowness forces social interaction and ensures that residents can easily observe public space from their windows, creating countless informal eyes on the street. The lack of long, deserted corridors and the abundance of active ground floor uses mean there are almost always people around, deterring opportunistic crime. A modern housing project with long, identical, poorly lit walkways between buildings can feel anonymous and unsafe, while a medieval lane, even at night, often feels secure because of its intimacy and the clear sense that it is someone's home. For a powerful case study in the restorative effect of this kind of environment, one need only spend an afternoon wandering the lesser town of Prague. Getting deliberately lost in its labyrinth of cobbled streets, away from the main tourist throngs, is a form of active therapy. The constant sensory input is rich but not overwhelming: the sound of your footsteps, the shifting light and shadow, the glimpses into quiet gardens. There are no billboards or traffic noises to hijack your attention. This allows for a state that psychologists call soft fascination, where the mind can rest and recharge while still being gently engaged. It's the opposite of the hard fascination demanded by a busy highway, which requires constant alertness and drains mental energy. In Prague, and in places like it, the urban geometry itself facilitates mindfulness and a connection to the present moment, offering a profound respite from the stress of modern life. This historical wisdom is now being consciously applied in contemporary wellness-focused design. The movement to create woonurfs or shared streets in the Netherlands, where pedestrians, cyclists, and cars all share the same space at very low speeds, directly borrows from the medieval model to calm traffic and reclaim space for people. New urbanist projects prioritize narrow streets, building frontages close to the sidewalk, and a variety of architectural details to create the same sense of enclosure, interest, and safety that defines the best medieval quarters. This brings us to a vital question for our future. If we know that certain street geometries can actively nurture our mental health and foster community, why do we so often default to designs that do the opposite? How can we consciously reintroduce these psychological principles into our own neighborhoods, even without half-timbered houses and ancient cobblestones? The answer lies not in replication but in adaptation. It means prioritizing pedestrians over cars in residential areas, using landscaping, pavement textures, and strategically placed seating to narrow the effective width of a street and slow traffic. It means designing curves and variety into new developments to create visual interest and a sense of discovery, even on a smaller scale. It means ensuring buildings have active frontages with windows and doors facing the street to provide those crucial eyes and create a feeling of life and security. Ultimately, it means shifting our priority from moving vehicles with maximum efficiency to creating environments where human beings can thrive, connect, and find moments of peace. The greatest legacy of the medieval street may be its timeless reminder that the truest measure of a city's success is not its speed, but its ability to make its inhabitants feel safe, engaged, and truly at home. We've journeyed together through the hidden heart of the medieval city, from the defensive curves that baffled invaders to the sacred alignments that connected the earthly to the divine. We've seen how these streets were far more than mere pathways. They were masterpieces of intentional design, where every angle and every width served a purpose, blending raw practicality with profound symbolism. The key takeaway from this exploration is the incredible adaptability of these designs. Medieval planners were not rigid ideologues. They were brilliant pragmatists who worked in harmony with the land, using local materials and respecting the natural contours of the earth to create urban forms that were both resilient and deeply human in scale. They understood that a city is a living organism, and its streets are the veins and arteries that carry the lifeblood of commerce, community, and belief. This journey reveals a timeless dialogue between strategy and symbol, between the need for security and the yearning for meaning. The same winding lane that slowed an enemy charge could also slow a pilgrim's step, encouraging reflection. The wide processional avenue that showcased a lord's power also channeled the wind to clear foul air. There was no hard division between the practical and the spiritual. They were woven together in the very fabric of the city, creating an environment that catered to the whole human experience. This holistic approach offers a powerful lesson for our modern urbanism, which often prioritizes efficiency and segregation of uses over this kind of rich, multi-layered integration. The historian Fern and Braudel beautifully captured this essence, noting that the street is the river of life of the city, the place where we learn, trade, and dream. So the next time you walk through any town or city, I encourage you to look down at the pavement beneath your feet with new eyes. Ask yourself about the story it tells. Why does this street curve? Why does that one suddenly widen into a square? What ancient decisions of defense, economy, or faith are fossilized in its layout? The secrets of the past are not locked away in books. They are etched into the ground we walk on every day, waiting for us to notice. Perhaps you've already seen a fascinating example in your own travels, a strange bend in the road, an old gatehouse, a street that seems to point directly at a distant hilltop. Share what you've found in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and uncover these hidden stories together. This exploration reminds us that history is not a distant abstraction. It is a living, breathing presence in our everyday landscapes, whispering its lessons from every cobblestone and corner, inviting us to listen, to learn, and to dream alongside those who walked these paths centuries before us. If this journey through the hidden geometry of medieval streets has sparked your curiosity, I genuinely hope you'll join us for future explorations into the fascinating layers of history that shape our world. Consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. I would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever walked through a medieval town and felt the story of its streets? Did you notice a particular curve that seemed designed for defense, or a layout that felt deeply symbolic? Sharing your own experiences helps build a wonderful community of curious minds. For those of you eager to dive even deeper into this topic, I cannot recommend enough Lewis Mumford's classic work, The City in History, which provides a breathtaking overview of urban development through the ages. You might also find yourself getting lost for hours in the digital archives of online resources like the Medieval Urban Archaeology database, which offers incredible maps and detailed reports on town layouts across Europe. These tools allow you to become the detective, uncovering the secrets hidden in plain sight, the story of how we shape our spaces and how those spaces in turn shape us is never truly finished. It's a conversation that stretches across centuries, and your curiosity is a vital part of keeping that dialogue alive. Thank you so much for watching, for your time and your imagination. Until our next exploration, keep looking closely, asking questions, and nurturing that sense of wonder about the world beneath.